Donald Trump's declaration that the United States would be taking over Gaza, a horrendous suggestion that he just keeps doubling down on, it seems to be, as many predicted, exacerbating tensions and potentially contributing to a collapse of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, which is the last thing that we want to see. Let me first remind you of, in recent days, what Trump has said, and then get to the news about the ceasefire deal. Here's Trump.
But what about the Palestinians who just won't leave? Our team has spoken to many.
They're all going to leave when they have a place that's a better alternative. When they have a nice place that's safe, they're all going to leave. It's a hellhole right now.
But how are you so sure? Will the U.S. force them to leave?
You're going to see that they're all going to want to leave.
Mr. President.
Of course, continuing to refuse to engage with the fact that that's just not realistic, that's not plausible, that's not humane, and he won't say on the record the United States won't force people out of their homes. And so what then are we talking about? A horrific, catastrophic event is what we're talking about. He also said this.
Mr. President, back on Gaza, the White House press secretary told us last week that you're committed to rebuilding Gaza. Steve Witkoff said that process would take 10 to 15 years. Does your commitment to rebuilding Gaza extend beyond your time in office?
I'm committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices. But we're committed to owning it, taking it, and making sure that Hamas doesn't move back. There's nothing to move back into. The place is a demolition site. It'll be, the remainder will be demolished. Everything's demolished. I mean, you can't live in those buildings right now. They're very unsafe. But we'll make it into a very good site for future development by somebody. We'll let other countries develop parts of it. It'll be beautiful. People can come from all over the world and live there. But we're going to take care of the Palestinians. We're going to make sure they live beautifully and in harmony and in peace, and that they're not murdered. This has been the most dangerous site anywhere in the world.
So it actually seems that the opposite is happening, that we're barreling toward more bloodshed and more tragedy. Here's CNN reporting on the collapsing, I guess is the way I'd word it, of the very delicate ceasefire deal.
CNN political and global affairs analyst Barak Ravid. He's also a politics and foreign policy reporter for Axios. Barak, what are you hearing from your sources in Israel about this?
I think the Israeli government at the moment is still trying to figure out whether this Hamas announcements are truly because of tactical issues on the ground about how many makeshift homes were allowed to go into Gaza, how many bulldozers to clear out debris has been allowed into Gaza, or whether it's a much bigger issue that has something to do with phase 2 of this deal. The negotiations on phase 2 are supposed to start last week. They still haven't started. So I think Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Netanyahu and his top aides who are meeting now in Jerusalem, are trying to figure out whether it's a tactical thing or something which is much more strategic.
And complicating that, we see the pictures coming from Tel Aviv. You have families, you have supporters of the families taking to the streets. Barak, what is the domestic pressure on Netanyahu in this, and how is that being perceived by Netanyahu and those close to him?
I think the pressure has been increasing quite dramatically since the hostages started coming out, and especially after last Saturday when the last 3 hostages who were released came out in a very, very bad physical condition. It created a wave of pressure on the government, both in demonstrations on the streets and both by statements by families of hostages who were released and families of hostages who are still in Hamas captivity. And I think the number one issue you hear from hostage families is deep concern that both Netanyahu, or a deep concern that Netanyahu managed to convince President Trump that phase 2 of the deal is not that important, and that the resumption of the war is more crucial at the moment.
I just want to let our viewers know, a moment ago we were looking at live pictures of protests in Tel Aviv following this announcement by Hamas. Barak, I want to play some sound for you of President Trump speaking to reporters on Air Force One, and he was talking about Palestinians' right to return to Gaza after it's supposedly redeveloped by the United States. Let's listen.
I think that it's a big mistake to allow people, the Palestinians or the people living in Gaza, to go back yet another time. And we don't want Hamas going back. And think of it as a big real estate site. And the United States is going to own it and will slowly, very slowly, we're in no rush, develop it.
Barak, how do those comments have an impact on the situation right now, and how could they shape the second phase of the ceasefire deal?
So they definitely have an impact, and there are some Israeli officials who are involved in the negotiations that think that this is also a signal by Hamas that it's their way to push back on Trump's recent comments about moving Palestinians out of Gaza, and also a signal by Hamas that if Netanyahu is not going to seriously negotiate on the second phase of the deal, then maybe maybe phase 1 will not be implemented in its entirety, and not all the hostages in phase 1 will be released. And I think that Trump said something very interesting on Air Force One, in addition to what you just showed. He said that there's a dribble of hostages coming out, and that at a certain point, and that he starts to lose his patience. And I think the number one question is whether President Trump is going to say now, listen, I'm not going to have like the situation of every week another 3 hostages. Everyone who is now held by Hamas, I want them out as part of one big deal and not this phased approach. And I think that's the question, whether Trump will go down that road.
And that actually analysis was provided before Trump made the announcement that I'm going to show you. But we just desperately want the hostages to be released, a ceasefire to hold. And Trump, if it were just him saying we want all the hostage released, that wouldn't be causing, at least in my analysis, the impediment to the continuation of this deal that there seems to be. And while there are so many factors outside of the U.S. president's control, him saying the U.S. would take over Gaza, something that obviously wasn't on the table, isn't a part of this deal, isn't rational, could that be playing a role in now complicating things where so many lives are on the line? In the wake of this, Trump said,
well, I would say this, and I'm going to let that because that's Israel's decision, but as far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off, and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock, and after that, I would say all hell is going to break out. Well,
so, and maybe the CNN analysis was after this, I'm not sure, but from the reports, you heard it there from the CNN analyst and a lot of other outlets reporting on the fact that a deal that Trump was even taking credit for, right? One of his representatives was a part of the final elements of it. It's what the Biden administration crafted. A very delicate deal, as I keep saying. And we'll see. But now they have this deadline. I saw that Netanyahu came out and agreed to it, being the noon deadline. If it is the case, and it very well could be, that Trump just doing what he does so often, which is just throw out random stuff. You know what? What if I heard Kushner, 'cause Jared Kushner was the one who originally floated this idea, talk about sort of a real estate opportunity here. What if we just did that? And then we could create a real estate endeavor. If that brainstorming publicly on something so consequential and proposing something so disastrous is serving as an obstacle to bring people back with their families and to prevent further devastating loss of life, then that is obviously extremely tragic and worthy of a ton of condemnation. Share your thoughts in the comments.